Great. Welcome and good morning, everybody. My name is Sharon Shaw, and I'll be leading the discussion again today. Again, this is the series for owners and executives on how to transition to a recurring monthly revenue type business model. Today, we're going to focus again a 30-minute time slot on a specific topic and just help us move things along. For those of you who were here last week and are here again today, thanks for joining. And for those of you who this is your first time attending this series, just want to say welcome. Just really briefly before we get started, just so you are you're aware of why we're doing this, is to try to provide a weekly communication source so that way everybody's just staying consistent in their efforts in this transition. We've seen a lot of companies kind of start and stall and start and stall. So we felt that by having a consistent and continuous sort of communication program, you would be able to keep it fresh in your mind and kind of help progress you through as 2013 is already 3 weeks in this year. We'll also be sharing some true stories about trial and error. Next week, we're actually going to have a guest speaker who's going to share a little bit about his experience as an integrator and how, what mistakes he made before he was able to really reap the benefits of that new shift, that business model. So it'll be great to hear from one of your peers. But this weekly webinar also demonstrates some accountability, consistency, and overall commitment to this business model and to working with integrator support. So with that, we have a message of the day each week, and today we're going to talk a little bit about comp programs. Last week we talked about the importance of getting buy-in early on in your transition and how to select your champions and what those champions need to do for you and how to engage them. So if you were not on last week's webinar, it has been recorded, and just shoot me an email if you didn't receive the link, and I'd be happy to shoot that over to you. But basically, we will be recording all these series as well so that if you ever miss one, you can get caught up. If you're ever driving or away from a computer, that's fine. You can always just use the dial-in number and listen to the audio, because really these slides are not that visual. It's more conversation anyhow. So today, we're talking about how to develop a compensation program for RMR. And our point number one is to keep it simple. I've had a lot of, companies come to me and sort of ask, what works, what doesn't work, how should we calculate it, how do we, what formulas should we use, and things like that. And I'd say that the number one thing that you need to focus on is keeping it simple. And so here is kind of what we recommend, if you will, for calculating commission. It's a very, very easy formula, if you can see. Basically it's just for every year's worth commitment from your customer, you should pay out 1 month's worth of that recurring revenue. So if you say you sell a project which is a $500 per month monitoring contract, and for 1 year, then your salesperson should receive a $500 commission. For a 2-year contract, $1,000. 3-year contract, $1,500. So you can see how it incentivizes your salespeople to sell the larger RMR type projects. The things like virtual guarding that can net additional revenue and really drive you towards your goals. In addition to that, incentivizing them based on the length of the contract, because as we all know, that's a critical factor. This is very, very simple, very basic. Now, as we dive into this topic, we'll also talk a little bit about some of the things that might need to come into play as far as, well, what do you do with that month RMR? What if there's more than one sales rep that was working on that deal? Things like that. So the last bullet you see is for contract renewals. You should have a plan, in place as well. And the reason why we're talking about compensation programs in general today is because as you start to get the buy-in and you start to move people in this direction, they want to know what it means to them. they need to know how it's going to affect them in a good or a negative way. So think about, whether it's something you feel company-wide, all of your sales reps are going to be responsible for hitting an RMR target, or is it going to be, some person that you assign to really developing this area of your business, or perhaps would it be a, sort of a team, maybe you have some sort of inside sales folks versus outside sales, and you might break up who generates the lead versus who follows up and closes the deal. So those are all things that you need to take into consideration as well. Now, the next point is to make sure it's fair. So I think that gets us to, talking a little bit about the general idea of how do you split a commission. Let me share a little story with you. I've got a dealer who hired somebody specifically to do managed services, and the guy's great, very smart, very driven, very ambitious, not willing to take no for an answer. That's what you need, right? Well, what happened though was this guy wasn't really from our industry, right? He didn't necessarily know about security integration. And so he came in with more of a, like managed services background and understands selling services to clients as compared to, equipment and project type sales. But here's what happened. He would go out, he'd knock on a few doors, and then he'd come back and, try to get some help, or, he would need to develop a proposal, need some equipment recommendations, and he can't do it all himself. He wasn't in a position to yet. And so inevitably, a senior account manager had to, kind of coach him a little bit, help him along, and that's fine. But you better believe that that senior account manager was wondering what his commission was going to look like after taking the time out of his day and away from his projects to assist this new rookie guy with his RMR project. So here's the thing, is if you decide to hire people from outside, you will need to have sort of a mentoring program. There's a learning curve there with, locking hardware and, certain things that until they've really seen it, experienced it, they know what the typical questions are coming from the customer's mindset, they're going to need some help. So you maybe should consider doing some sort of a mentoring program. But to make sure it's fair, here are some of the things that we recommend. Clearly explain the goals to everybody. So that's everybody, not just the people receiving a commission, okay? But everybody in the company that touches these projects needs to understand what the goal is. They need to know, what kinds of services you're trying to add to proposals. They need to know how it's going to affect the billing process, how it's going to affect, the proposal process, if there's additional documentation that needs to be assigned and things like that. So it's going to be important that everybody is aware of the overall company goals, which you could really primarily address in that company meeting we talked about last week. But then as you get more into the how is it going to work and how does the money change hands, consider your senior account managers versus your rookies. And then also consider your other champions that are involved, your project managers, your whoever maybe would be in charge of interfacing between, the customer and the monitoring center from a technical standpoint, making sure that all of the I's are dotted and T's are crossed on that end. Maybe having a little bonus for, reaching a certain number of projects or something like that for those folks. Make it worth their while. Here's another thing. I've seen some other companies that did sort of a sink or swim, do or die kind of rollout. And it was basically, okay, we've got all of you guys, you've all been a part of our team for a certain number of years. We appreciate all of your service throughout, that period. however things are changing, you will no longer be eligible for even the equal commission you used to make on projects if there's no RMR. So in some cases, they've actually made it mandatory to have recurring revenue attached to a certain project. And by making it mandatory, they're enforcing that with everybody, that's in charge of selling. And so what happened was, they lost a couple of their star salespeople, the guys who sold big systems, because they didn't feel comfortable selling services. They didn't know how. And we can help train people, but you have to think about who is the elephant hunter versus who can really understand the value of capturing a lot of smaller deals that will ultimately bring more profitability and net worth to your company. Keep your goals visible and discuss them frequently. So as you start to establish, a budget or a goal for recurring revenue, not just from a compensation standpoint, but when you have your company meetings on Mondays or whatever days you usually do your sales meetings, make sure that you have, that as an agenda item each week. Hey, what project are we working on? Which of these projects can we, maybe offer a monitoring contract to or offer a managed access contract to? And just make sure it's part of the culture. Really have to get it into every company discussion. So kind of going back, I kind of danced around this, but going back a couple slides to the comp program, if you were going to be sharing, this kind of revenue, splitting it between multiple salespeople, what I would do is, think of it like, if you were that senior account manager, if you were that rookie, if you're the rookie, you expect the senior manager to have a little bit of an upper hand. They're taking a little more responsibility. They're also the ones that have the most experience, so they should be held a little bit more accountable, and thus they should probably get more of a commission. If you feel you want to do 50-50, that's fine. So for that $500 a month contract, you do 250 to one and 250 to the other. If you have, if you think it's maybe more of a 60-40 split, do a 300 and a 200 payout. That's really up to you, and that's one of those things where you know your company better than I do. We have been working with a gentleman by the name of Chris Peterson, who works for a company called Vector Firm. And what Vector Firm does is they basically specialize in sales consultation. And in general, aligning sales goals with the company and aligning the company with those goals and identifying things that are, maybe roadblocks between you and success and helping develop your overall market strategy, things like that. Chris is a tremendous resource. And so I'd highly recommend, if you guys are interested in having somebody from the outside really dig in deep and help you figure out what the right, solution is for your organization, let me know, and I'll do an introduction to Chris. He will be doing some presentations through this webinar series as well, so you'll get to know him a bit through this. And I think it would just be worthwhile to have that outside perspective. So what are some adjustments that might happen as you're developing your comp program? Really what you should do is incentivize not just your people, but your customers to go with a recurring revenue type service. So what should happen, if you can, if at all possible, is make it where you break even on the installation itself, and then you make your money and your margins primarily in the recurring revenue. I've seen some companies kind of go towards that, like they would break even on the hardware, but they're still marking up labor, things like that. So there's different ways to do it. But the reason I'm saying that is because if your customer sees that they can, get a better solution, a better service for just that simple monthly dollar fee that we talked about last week. And if they look at comparatively, to just getting a system installed, it should be less, inclining to go with just a system. You want them to see that they're getting a better deal by signing on with you as a partner in service. So the labor and the hardware and your overall margins will probably require some adjustments, and therefore, probably some adjustments on the standard commission you've already been paying out on those things. So something to think about there. Commissions on the project, like I just mentioned, would shift if you're going to adjust your margins so that way you're not eating away at your profitability too much. Commissions on the RMR, obviously. And then lastly is a legacy versus new installation commission. You guys, believe it or not, are probably sitting on a gold mine. The customers that you've already done work for, that trust you, that know you, that have hired you in the past, that have surveillance systems or access control systems already installed, the hard work is really kind of over on generating that contact and generating that lead. So having a program in place to incentivize your team to go after your existing customers. I think a lot of people have thought about it, but they feel for some reason like they need to generate leads elsewhere, they need new customers, and I don't know if it's because they just really need to get that project-type revenue, and that's still their primary focus. But you need to have a goal or some kind of carrot for your team to go after your existing customer base. In a lot of cases, those legacy systems will incorporate some additional sales. They'll maybe add voice over IP, perhaps they'll add some video analytics, perhaps you'll update their NVR, something like that to make it, ready to be monitored without having to rip and replace everything on site. So there will be some added benefit to that, and maybe though it would be that your legacy commission on the RMR stuff would be a little bit higher than your standard commission, just simply because they're going to need a reason to do it. And if there's not enough of an incentive to go after that stuff because most of their commission comes from project sales, you're going to need to adjust that. So that's just a few of the adjustments that you're going to want to make or be prepared for. And again, we're happy to help you guys, and as is Chris from the Vector firm. So I strongly recommend you kind of think about that. And I will be sending out a survey of sorts over the next couple of days. It'll just be a link in an email that you go to, and you just kind of fill out some basic information. And it's going to help me understand where you are in this transition and maybe how we can dive in and help you a little bit. So what I propose is to have you fill out that survey, and what will happen is all the respondents I'll reach out to, and we'll just discuss, where we need to go. Have you gone about identifying your champions from last week? Have you scheduled a company meeting? Have you set any kind of targets for recurring revenue growth? And lastly, have you talked to your team about sales commissions, things like that? It's not just us pumping out information and things that might help, but just like in monitoring, it's one thing to get an alarm, but it's the response that matters. And so that's what we'll do with that survey, is kind of respond and be proactive and reach back out to you to figure out, what do we do next. Here in a little bit, let's see, at 11:30 Eastern Time, we've got another presentation coming up for the sales folks. I know quite a few of you have your sales team registered for that webinar as well. And basically today what we're going to be talking about is lead generation and how to go about finding opportunities for these things, and just, where to dig them up, because they do exist. And so if you guys don't have your sales team registered to sign up for today, I recommend you do that. And if you are, I look forward to having you guys there, because I think that will go in nicely, as you start to lay out the roadmap and the framework of what your RMR goals and your strategy is going to look like. Having it already kind of a seed in the back of their mind that, and I already kind of have some ideas, and I've been taught a little bit about how to find these leads. It'll make it seem more possible. So I'd recommend, if you guys can, attend that next webinar. That would be great. And then please keep an eye out for that survey, because that survey will help me help you, and then we can reach out and individually, one-on-one have some discussions about how to further this effort. So with that, I think we're right about our 30-minute mark here. I just want to thank you all again for your time today. And any feedback that you guys have on this, please shoot me an email. Just reply to any of the webinar emails you got, because we want to make sure that this is the kind of topic you want to hear about on Tuesday mornings, and that we're sharing the information that you need most. So any topic recommendations, suggestions, or feedback from what we've already done would be very much appreciated. And otherwise, I hope to have you all on the next webinar here in about 30 minutes. Thank you all. Have a wonderful day. Bye-bye.